this celebration of the Holy Family, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. It always happens within the octave, the 8 days of Christmas. If there's a Sunday during that time, we celebrate this particular mystery that when God entered into time and space, when God entered into history to save us, he didn't appear instantly as a man, but was born a baby and grew up and had a family. Something very mysterious, the fact that God has experienced family life. He knows what that is like and the mystery of this. And so the church really invites us to meditate upon and look at the mystery of family today. And it's a good time to do it shortly after Christmas because people are traveling. They're either with family or they're thinking about family. And sometimes it reminds us how sometimes we can drive each other crazy. Sometimes how difficult family can be. That reality of it, which is just a very human thing, because if we believe this Christian fact or this thing about reality that every person is imperfect, right? That every person has their sins and temptations, then no matter who you stay with, even the best of people, you're going to bump up against their weaknesses and fragilities. And that's going to affect you. And then even scarier than that, they're going to bump up against my weaknesses and fragilities. And this is a painful and terrifying fact. And so many people have lived the reality, kind of the very painful thing of this within families. And so family, especially today, this celebration is becoming more and more outside of our experience. Becoming more and more outside of, even just, I've noticed, kind of the history of television, of sitcoms. 20 years ago, there was this huge shift where all the sitcoms used to be about families. And then all of a sudden it changed because that experience was outside of people's experience or too painful. So so many of the sitcoms and shows from the last 20 years up to today have been about groups of friends. Like Seinfeld, Friends, or people that you work with, like The Office, Parks and Rec. All of these shows, it shifted from the experience of family. And as that became more and more something too painful or outside of the human or the modern American experience, it became about groups of friends. And so there's this very real reality of experience of family being something very, very painful and something we avoid. And yet also we're kind of drawn to it as well. Even in the language that we use, people will say he's like a father to me, meaning that there's a value to fatherhood. Or we're not just friends, we're family. Meaning that there's a value to family. The language that we use upholds the goodness of family even when it's a reality of pain for us, or it's something extremely difficult for us, or it's something that we try and avoid. There's this weird in-between thing where we're both repelled and drawn by it in the modern world. And so especially as we begin a new year, and everybody's got their New Year's resolutions and everything like that, the church is really proposing to us to look at and ask this question of what does it mean to live the experience of family, especially if this is a value, especially if this is something important because God lived this reality when he came to save us. He lived this reality. So how do I live the experience of family in a more true and beautiful way? Or is it possible to live family in a new way when it seems like it's crumbling in the world and it seems like those that have lived it don't live it well? How do we, is it possible to live this in a new way even today? And what I want to propose and have us look at is the experience of Simeon and Anna, who we heard in the gospel, that were in the temple and they were living with this disposition of openness. They had somehow, by the gift of the Spirit, knew that they were going to meet the Messiah. They knew they were going to encounter him. And so when the Holy Family, when Jesus, Mary, and Joseph come into the temple, they look like any other family. And as a matter of fact, the offering that they give is the offering of the poor. Usually you do use a lamb and a turtle dove. And they give 2 turtle doves. So this is a poor family. They give the poor offering, just like any other. And yet Simeon and Anna both recognize them. They both recognize them. And Simeon comes forward and holds the child Jesus and contemplates his face and adores him and thanks God for him. This beautiful moment, and says this very beautiful prayer of, Lord, now you let your servant go in peace. Your word has been fulfilled. for my eyes have seen the salvation. Like, I have seen salvation in the face of this child. There's something so important and relevant for us today in this. And part of the reason why is because, like, the more efficient we've become in the modern world, like, there's become more and more of value to getting more things done, right? Like, we need to be more efficient. And so there's become more and more of value to doing things. And yet it's easy to, like, do things and have more and more activities and everything like that. And it's so easy in doing all these things to really lose the face of the other person, or to forget, like, why we loved them in the first place. Like, it's easy in all of our activities to lose our origin, to really lose the face of the other. I hate cliches. I hate these kinds of phrases. Like, usually they lose their content, but I had a friend who would always say, like, we're not human doings. We're human beings. That's, it's true, but, like, it drives me crazy. But it's true. Like, the thing is, we live, though, as if the highest value is to become more efficient and to do lots and lots and lots and lots of things. And yet we tend to lose why we do anything at all. Like, we lose this aspect of contemplation, of really looking at the face of the other person. And yet if we do this, if we live this experience of contemplation, those of you that pray like a holy hour or do adoration, like, the more I just look at Jesus, like, the more I just look at him in the mystery of the Blessed Sacrament, the more I love him and the more I desire to do his will. The more I actually desire to follow him. Like, my desire increases in just being with, being for. Like, and it's the thing is this thing of contemplation is exactly the same way in the way that we need to live with each other. Like, how rarely we actually look at each other. Like, really look at each other and be amazed by the mystery of the other. Think about this, like, parents, like, the fact that your kids have rich interior lives and think things and have experienced things that you have no clue about. And yet they were generated from you. Or, like, kids towards parents, the fact that, like, your parents have a past, like, they've lived lives that you have no clue about. Like, how mysterious the other person is, and we totally miss this. Like, you can live with someone for years and years and years and in some ways lose their face because we don't live with this, like, contemplative disposition. We don't really look at the face of the other. And if we live this way, like, we lose them. Like, this is in some ways what the modern world has lost, and this is why, like, this is part of why it's so difficult for people to live the reality of family today, is because we don't live this Christian sense of being with, of, like, really contemplating the face of the other and recognizing the other as gift. And yet this is an incredibly human thing. There's this beautiful book I was reading over Christmas break. Well, I had a short break. But it's called Gilead by Marilyn Robinson, and it's about this Protestant pastor who's he's dying, and he's writing all the things he wants his young son to know before he dies. And one of the things he says in there very beautifully is he's saying, like, the thing that I love most about you is your existence. Like, the fact that you exist. That's what I love most about you. And he, like, desiring his son to know that. But, like, how true that is. Like, and how beautiful that is. And parents, you've lived this experience of, like, seeing the face of your child. Like, it is just good that they exist. Or, like, for those of you that are married or in relationships, that moment when you see the face of the other, and it's like, it's just good that you exist, that you are. Like, to contemplate the face of the other. But we live in a world where we do more and more and more and more things, and we lose this contemplative element of life. And because of that, we lose each other, and we lose God. When we lose, like, contemplating the face of Jesus, like this time of prayer, and when we lose really contemplating each other, really looking at each other, really being with each other, like, it all just becomes work. Even the relationships we had that we chose freely, it just feels like work because we've lost the face of the other. Like, there's a really important, like countercultural aspect of Christianity, and that's just the fact of being. Like, it is good that you exist. Like, the gift of just being. Like, we've lost this. And even, this sense of, like Sunday being a day of rest, like that was never meant to be just like, you have to do this because you're a Christian. Like, even with the Jewish people, it wasn't just a religious observance. It was a human thing. Like, to stop and just be with. Just to, like, be with the other. And that when I lose that, in some ways I lose my humanity. Like, we don't know really how to live as human beings. And that's why God became human to save us. Like, this is the whole divine project, to teach us again what it means to be human. And so we've lost this aspect, and we filled it just with lots of doing lots of different activities, and yet we lose ourselves, and we lose God, and we lose our humanity. And so the whole divine project is learning how to be, how to contemplate, really how to adore. Like, that is the divine project. Like, that is what we are called and meant to live. And in the modern world, like, we've lost this. And because of that, we've lost God, and we've also lost each other. Super depressing. We always do this. Think about how beautiful it is that this mystery of the fact that we know so little about, like, the experience of young Jesus. Like the experience of the infancy narratives, and so much of the Gospels are about Jesus' public ministry, and yet him growing up, there's nothing there. Like, there's very little. We get a few words. We get these words at the end of Luke's Gospel, and we find out about the finding of him in the temple. But it's because, like, God is really, like, there's this experience of just contemplating and just being and just living, and the goodness of that. Of just living and growing up, and that God himself has lived this and experienced this in Jesus Christ. So, like, all of this has, and like work, that he had a job, he worked. Like, all of these things have a positive value in him. So we go into the new year, so we begin, everybody's got their resolutions, and that's fantastic. But what I would propose as a New Year's resolution is that, like, we do less things. We do less things. And we live this, like, Christian sense of being. Like, carving out space just to stay together. You cook a meal, and you eat a meal, and you stay together. Very simple. And, like, making space to intentionally, like, look at each other's faces and listen to each other and give each other a space just to be. And, like, just to enjoy each other's company. That, it'll be difficult. But it'll be good, because what we've lost in some ways, I come back to what Father Jose Medina told us so often, is he'd say, like, the modern world hasn't lost God, or hasn't rejected God, it's rejected its humanity. And because of that, it's lost God. Because all of our humanity points towards him. And so it's the same, this temptation is the same for us as well. And this is really the challenge of these days, is to live with the disposition of Simeon, to really adore and contemplate the face of Christ, but then also to make space to contemplate and really look at each other, particularly family, to really look at each other and just live in the experience and appreciate the goodness of the other, the fact that you exist, like the fact that you are. And if we live this way, if we live with this openness, like, we can say the same thing Simeon said at the end of his life. My own eyes have seen the salvation. My own eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared in the sight of all the peoples. God bless.